Welcome back to Prison Professors. I am Michael Santos with episode 2 of Ken Oliver, an individual who served multiple decades in high security California prisons. But what he didn't do is waste his time. Instead, while living in the most degrading of circumstances, he conditioned his mind to be strong. We're going to learn about that today. In the show notes below, you will see a link to the first episode. You will also see the contact information for Ken Oliver, a remarkable story of resilience and the best possible outcomes that can come out of really what I consider to be one of the greatest social injustices of our time, and that's all the ancillary consequences and collateral influences that follow time in prison. So Ken, thank you so much for taking time to speak with us again. In the previous episode, you told us about the horrific journey of serving multiple decades in high security prisons, but yet you were able to overcome that indignity. And I would like to hear a little bit about when you started to have that mind shift and what it was that influenced you along the way.
Sure. I think that what initially set my mind on this course was when I actually was given 52 years to life. And I think I refused in that moment to allow either the court or the system to define my life as a throwaway life. At that moment, I wanted to take responsibility for the position that I had placed myself in and placed my family in. But in that moment, I also wanted to say, this is not the end, and whatever it is that's in store for me, I don't know, but I'm going to determine what that future is. So I really had to go a lot on faith, but I also knew that I played an integral part in what my future held. So as I mentioned to you earlier, as soon as I came to prison, I got immediately into reading, advocacy, and just really educating myself, because I knew that even though they had taken my body, they hadn't taken my mind. And my mind is something that I would take with me as long as I was on this earth. And so, it was just something that I possessed and became obsessive about, that I was going to feed this mind with all of the positive food that I possibly could, because I knew it was the one thing that the state couldn't take from me. And so that's kind of the mindset I went into this with. And then when I went to solitary confinement, instead of like capitulating or backing up, I actually doubled down on that premise.
Well, you were in solitary confinement in a lot of places. I mean, even serving time in the high desert where you started this journey. My experience when I was in high security, I may have been on the general population, but we were locked down all the time. So it's the same thing. So did you start that process at high desert?
Yes.
Because you didn't get to Pelican Bay until several years later, right?
Right. Yeah, I started that process as soon as I went to high desert. Just to avoid a lot of the politics that goes on in the yard. I certainly would socialize. I had a lot of, friends that were in prison, but I tried to stay on the periphery of the political stuff because it was toxic, it was negative, and it wasn't one of the things that I wanted to feed my mind with. So I spent a lot of time reading. I spent a lot of time in the law library attempting to research whether what they had done to me was legal in reference to the length of time.
And yet you had no education at that time, correct? No formal education.
I still don't have a formal education. I had no formal education then, and I still have no formal education, but I probably have 9 degrees of life experience in listening to some of the best minds in the world through thousands of books I've read since I went to prison. And I just want to stress that enough. People, when I was growing up, like reading was kind of like taboo. That's for squares, that's for nerds or whatever. But it really gives you the opportunity to have conversations, mental conversations, internal conversations with some of the best minds that have ever existed on this planet. And for me, that fed me and fueled me because I wanted to listen to people that were smarter than me. I didn't want to listen to people that were on my same level because I knew that I wouldn't be able to learn a lot. So yeah, that journey started, but it really concentrated and escalated exponentially when I was in solitary confinement, because at that moment I knew that what the Department of Corrections was doing to guys like me and to me was extremely cruel, was extremely wrong. And I was determined to find out and make a pathway for myself out of that situation if I possibly could. And ultimately, I created a pathway out of solitary confinement and ultimately out of prison as a result of what they did to me in solitary confinement. We can talk about that later, but yeah, that was kind of my path, Michael.
So when you were starting that path and starting to learn, you were not reading Louis L'Amour and Danielle Steele. You were reading complex literature, really almost learning a new language, a new vocabulary, and building it. And now you're extremely articulate, and I know you're really conditioned to think in sentences and paragraphs. I don't imagine that's the way that you started. Just like a lot of our viewers of the Prison Professors program, they also have to be self-directed and teach themselves. Could you tell us a little bit what you can remember about any methodical ways that you may have worked to build your vocabulary and understand the power of language?
Sure.
I mean, and again, I want to comment. I did in the last video. I see Malcolm X behind you. He was a huge inspiration to me just because of that, because he understood to become a great communicator, I first need to develop my vocabulary, and I have to invest the time. You can't fake that. You cannot fake the investment that you made in yourself.
Absolutely.
And I want people to see that. I don't want people to look at you and say, oh, I'm not like that guy. He's super smart. You know, it didn't start that way. And tell them about the work you had to put in to become this articulate man.
Sure. Well, one of the things I didn't do, to your point about Louis L'Amour and Danielle Steele, is I've never been a big fan of the soap opera genre, whether it be on TV or whether it be in books. Some people are, because, you know, I understand that some people entertain themselves or medicate that way by getting into alternative mindsets. For me, I wanted to get into reality mindsets, things that actually affected my life. Maybe that was selfish to some degree, but I never was attracted to, like, let me find a way to disappear into a fantasy novel for 2 weeks. For me, I wanted to get into, how can I improve myself? How can I be successful? How can I get the things I want in life without committing crimes? You know, how can I do things that other people are doing so easily that's been so difficult for me in life? So my journey started out reading, ironically enough, the autobiography of Malcolm X, which was a big inspiration. And although I probably wasn't as disciplined as him to start with the aardvark and write down every word in the dictionary, I did make it a point that every time I came across a word, and this was very often, it would take me a long time to get through books initially, I would write down every word that I didn't know. I would highlight it in the book. I would get out this big Webster's dictionary that I had. I would look it up, write it down, and then I would read that page over. So that way I could put things in context, right? So it was almost like putting a puzzle together for me. And there were just so many words that, you know, in a lot of these books. I read Plato's Republic, and, you know, just about every philosophical book, Nietzsche. I mean, I read just about everything at some point. And there's just so many words that you don't know. And if you don't know the words, you can't put them in context and actually wrap your mind around the message that's being delivered. So I spent a lot of time doing that. I would also write down the pronunciation key of the word because of some of the words I didn't know how to pronounce. And so that would be frustrating to me. So I would actually write them down. I would look up the key about how to pronounce a certain A or a certain R, or the stress in a certain syllable. And that was just a process. It was like, I don't know, it was like taking yourself through a metamorphosis, so to speak. And it took a long time, maybe 4 or 5 years of doing that consistently, to where now I was reading books faster, more easy, and I was grabbing concepts more. And I think it's important for me to throw out there that at that time I had no possibility to come home. My earliest possible release date, earliest when they sent me a paper every quarter, was 2048. The year, and I would have been 81, 82 years old at that time. So for all intents and purposes, I was going to die in the prison environment. I had no hope, but I wanted to hold on to some piece of myself just for survival, when that was my mind. And so that's why I was feeding it as much as I would. But most definitely, I started out just like anybody else. I mean, I had a 9th grade education. I didn't even finish the 9th grade. I went to about 2/3 of my 9th grade year before I started getting in trouble. And it was just really a tenacity and an obsession that I had to build what little I had left. In my mind, I had lost like everything in my life. I had lost relationships that I had on the streets with my kids, and I couldn't be the type of father I wanted. I couldn't be the type of professional that I wanted. I couldn't be the type of successful person that I wanted to be. So I was just determined to make that a piece of my success, to hold on to some sense of dignity and not just collapse in the prison environment and give up. Because when you have no hope of getting out, it's easy to fall into, I have nothing else and just give up. And it happens to guys a lot of times. And, you know, we can look to the outside circumstances, but at the end of the day, I think we're responsible how we respond to negativity and negative circumstances. I think we're responsible for how we respond and react in the face of challenges. And I just chose to react standing up rather than getting on my knees.
And so you continued this path for 20 years. At some point, you connected with lawyers that came in to advocate together with you. Could you walk us through how that happened and perhaps how the decisions that you made along the way influenced those lawyers to pick up the mantra and start working for you?
On May 25th, I was on the prison yard, just got through doing a workout. I said, let me call Mike about another piece of legislation. I wasn't even thinking about this piece of it because it was a lot of back and forth with the LA County Superior Court. So I kind of like blocked it out of my mind. So I didn't get a lot of stress about it. I called him up and I said, hey, Mike, have you heard about, you know, Proposition 57 and how that affects, you know, free strikers, et cetera? And he was like, hey, Ken, you know, screw Prop 57. He said, you know, we're on to bigger and better things. I said, bigger and better things like what? He said, well, are you sitting down? I said, no, I'm on the yard, standing up on the payphone, right? And he says, well, I got good news for you. I heard from the LA Superior Court and the district attorney, and they're going to release their objection to you being resentenced. And he said, you'll be home before the week's out. This was like a Tuesday, right? So I said, I'll be home before the week's out. I said, Mike, don't play with me, right? I'm in my 24
years in, and you're going to be out before the week's out.
And he said, I'll be out. He said, I'd be out within 5 days. And so it was kind of a surreal moment. Like my mind started to like spin a little bit, and I hung up the phone, and a couple of my buddies that I worked out with said, you know, what's wrong with you? You have like this weird look on your face. And just a tear came down my face. I said, you know, I just talked to my attorney. I'll be home before the week's out. And so there was kind of like a release, so to speak, in my spirit. To think that was going to be true. And it was overwhelming for me in that particular moment, because for many years I lived with the fact that I may die where I was at, and that there was no possibility maybe to get out. And to be able to release that feeling and know that that was a reality, like, it was just overwhelming.
That's an amazing story, Ken. And I know that there's a lot more that I want to ask you about that, but our time is coming in. So I'm going to ask you if we could reschedule another episode, another time, because some of the things that I really want to share that are real big takeaways for me in your story are, you know, walk us through some of the steps that you took to nurture the relationship with Mike. And did you meet Emily also at Stanford?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, they've got an amazing team, and they're incredibly generous with their time and helping people in prison. Did you know Joan Peters-Celia by any chance ever? Did you ever meet her at Stanford?
No, Joan Peters-Celia. No, the main people I know is Debbie Mukamal, who's the head.
Oh yeah, Debbie. Yeah.
Debbie, and I know Susan Champion, who works with Mike and Milena. So
Sure.
You know, I have a great relationship with Stanford. I do a lot of stuff with them now, with prison fellowships and other.
Are you in the Bay Area, or are you in Southern Cal?
No, I'm in the Bay Area. I'm in Oakland, California.
Okay. Well, it's just an amazing story. I'm so happy for you. Could you, before we close this episode, could you tell our audience what you've been doing for the past year, your first year of liberty?
That may be another episode by itself, Mike.
Abbreviated. We'll schedule it again.
Sure. When I got out, I immediately was taken from a friend of mine who runs the Underground Scholars Program at Berkeley, was taken to a organization called Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, who ironically enough was involved with the class action lawsuit against the Department for Solitary Confinement. And they had a position open for a paralegal. And so they hired me as a paralegal at the organization. And then I may have been there about a month, and they said, well, we don't want you just to be a paralegal because you have a dynamic voice, so we want you to be an organizer. So they, promoted me to being a lead organizer. I did that for a few months, and then they said, well, not only are you a great organizer, we think that you're great with policy, because some of the things that you've spoken about, we want you in Sacramento speaking to the legislature on behalf of, reform. And so they promoted me to policy director. So within 6 months of coming home, I was already the policy director of a major organization who had been around for 40 years and has a pretty stellar reputation, dealing with Senator Skinner and dealing with all the different senators up there about reform, actually Is that bothering you right there, that train?
I don't mind at all. Your story is more powerful than that noise.
The train is going to go by. I live right by a train track, and that horn goes by.
I know that train track.
Sure. But so what happened is all of a sudden I started getting involved with policy. So now I was involved with providing voting rights for people who are on parole in California, which was ACA 6. Now it's Prop 17 on the ballot in November. I was involved with doing parole reintegration credits, which incentivizes people to do good when they get out on parole. So if you go to school or you go to work or you do programs like Michael Santos' program, then you'll actually earn time from your parole period. So you can cut your parole period in half, kind of like a half time for parole. And just got involved with a lot of the different criminal justice reform bills and created a reputation and a following for myself, working with other organizations and learning so much on the fly, which fit my personality. And now I'm on this great project. Stanford's involved with the project for workforce development to get people who are paroling from prison into the tech sector, not necessarily with coding, but with other tech skills like quality assurance, UX, UI design, et cetera, and entrepreneurship, which we're tying into the Stanford entrepreneurship program there, to really create pathways for men and women to earn sustainable careers rather than just get basic jobs. Certainly there's nothing wrong with basic jobs, but when you talk about sustainability in places like the Bay Area, Orange County, or LA, $16 an hour typically doesn't cut it. And that's what we're creating now.
Are you working with the Last Mile at all?
No, well, I'm familiar with the Last Mile, and I know Kenyatta over there at the Last Mile.
Sure.
They're great friends of mine. They're great friends of mine.
I was going to ask if you knew Kenyatta during your journey. Did you know him in prison or at home?
No, I know him since I've been home. And me and him are great friends. I mean, pretty much anybody in the political landscape that's formerly incarcerated, I've had the pleasure to meet and spend some time with. One of the first calls I made, Michael, is to the Last Mile and to a company called Defy Ventures, a program I went through when I was in prison, to find out about programming out here on the streets. And one of the gaps that I found is that all of these organizations that create these wonderful programs inside the prison environment don't create these programs outside of the prison environment. Now, on first blush, that may not seem like a problem, but it's a problem when 99% of the people in prison will never get to San Quentin prison and be able to participate in the Last Mile. They create 30 slots every 2 years. And to get into San Quentin, you have a better chance of discovering the Holy Grail. Right? I mean, that's how tough it is to get into San Quentin.
Have you spoken with Chris and Beverly at the Last Mile?
Yes, I spoke to Kenyatta. They put me in contact. I mean, he put me in contact. We had conversations. They're not interested in doing anything on the streets. So what kind of happened is I went to a conference at Checker, which is a tech company in San Francisco, and they were doing a conference about fair chance hiring, second chance hiring. And go ahead. The organization that I work for was invited, and then my ED took me over there, and I ended up meeting a lady who's the head of human resources and has been this champion for fair chance hiring. I actually met her in the prison environment when they came in and did a mock simulation of interviews at Soledad for guys in prison on what it's like to interview tech companies, et cetera. And so we struck up a conversation. She asked me, well, Ken, what's missing in the landscape? What do we need to do? And I said, well, really what's missing is talent development, because we know that prison systems across the country don't allow guys to access technology. And that's problematic, because when you're asking guys that have gotten locked up in the 90s, guys have gotten locked up in the early 2000s, like they don't know how to work on a smartphone. They've never seen a smartphone. They don't know how to work a Google Doc or Gmail or a Zoom call, et cetera. And so for me, that puts you even more behind the 8 ball when you come home to get marketable skills that can sustain you into a place where you can live a livable wage. I work with so many men and women who get out, they go to transitional facilities, and they are immediately placed by these job placement groups that are kind of like almost like the private prison industry, where they're profiteering off of placing people at these low wage, low skilled jobs. People are getting 15, 16 bucks an hour, and then their time at the transitional house is up. Now you have to live in Oakland, the East Bay, or San Francisco. You have to live in LA County. You don't have a support system. Mom, sister, and everybody is off doing their own thing. They don't have space for you. So what do you do if you're 1 year out of doing 20 years in prison? You're making $16 an hour. You're doing everything you're supposed to do. You're reporting to your parole officer. You're going to work. You don't have a lot of skill sets, and then you're asked to actually kind of survive and pave your way, to pay health insurance, to pay car insurance, to pay car, and all the things, you know, that we pay in life. And for me, I thought that we were setting men and women up as a community almost for failure. Right.
Yeah, ask them to go learn how to swim, but shackling your ankles and your wrists before they throw you in the water.
Exactly, Michael. You know exactly what I'm saying. And the reality is that most people in prison, in the prison environment, aren't always self-determined. In a way, sometimes they need a lift up. And I'm a person that believes in lifting people up and putting people in the front. And so I said, well, if there's no program like this for people, let's build a reentry program where people can come, where the housing stress is taken away, because housing is a problem. Let's build a program that looks like Job Corps or some other type of program where they can come in and get tech skills. Let's build a program where we're building B2B relationships and actually placing people in internships or apprenticeships at these tech companies and really making it part of their DEI strategy, right? And so that, you know, that's what I'm doing. I'm very excited to be able to do it and to be able to move people and pay what I've been gifted with forward. And I tell that to Mike Romano and the law firm there all the time. Like, you know, you guys think it's not that I'm anything special. There's a lot of men and women, not only in California, but across the country, that are in the same position as me, but 99% of them will never have Stanford representing them. 99% of them will never have Mayor Brown representing them. So I'm extremely blessed that somebody took an interest in my particular cause and my particular story and said, we think that you're a decent guy. We want to help you be successful. We want to help you get out of prison. But there's a lot of people we left behind that haven't had that opportunity, right? They're back fighting, struggling, swimming upstream, so to speak. And I really want to reach back and help those people and the people that are transitioning back into the community.
Well, Ken, you're helping a lot of people right now, including me, with your inspiring story. And I'm just super grateful that we've connected and that I'm able to share your story on the Prison Professors Program. We will pipe your story in to jails and prisons across America, helping people understand that regardless of what challenge they're going through today, they can be putting themselves on a pathway to success. It doesn't happen by accident. I know that you did a lot of hard work on the way to develop yourself. And we can all learn from that. And I will look forward to creating lessons around you and hope that you'll be a continuing guest on our program.
Absolutely. I appreciate you, Michael. It's been a blessing to be here, and I'm honored to meet you. I know a lot about you, read a lot about you, and actually be face-to-face with you. It's my honor and pleasure.
Well, I am Michael Santos with Prison Professors. Super enthusiastic to introduce you to my new friend, Ken Oliver. His contact information is on the show notes below. Please subscribe to the program. This is the way that we all can be the change that we want to see in the world, and following in the footsteps of not only the man you're looking at, that's the guest of this show, but also the men behind him, Malcolm X, who inspired both Ken and me. Thank you so much for being a part of the program.
Thank you.